My name is Paige Mercer and I'm 31 years old. 19 years ago, my parents pulled out of a gas station 80 miles from home and left me standing under the fluorescent lights because I was 12 and I had told the truth in public. I slept behind the dumpster that night, wrapped in my brother's baseball hoodie, counting headlights and hoping one pair would turn around. None did. I never spoke to my parents again. No calls, no holidays, not so much as a postcard for 19 years. Then, this past August, an ivory envelope showed up at my apartment in Columbus. Inside was my brother's wedding invitation, and a handwritten note from my parents, a single line that made my hands shake at my own kitchen table. But here's what none of them knew when they mailed that envelope: what I would learn in the week before the wedding, and what I would do when my father raised his glass in front of 200 guests. My family still hasn't recovered from it. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where quiet people finally get their say, and family secrets don't stay buried. If stories about standing up without shouting are your kind of stories, drop a comment below and be sure to subscribe. Now, let me take you back to where it started. The Tuesday it arrived, I had just finished 11 hours in the pediatric emergency room at St. Ambrose Children's Hospital. My last patient was an 8-year-old named Ruby with a green stick fracture in her left arm. She held still for the X-ray like a soldier. Then she looked up at me and asked the question I hear more often than any adult would believe. Will my mom be mad at me? I crouched down to her level, the way I always do. No, sweetheart. Getting hurt is not a crime. She studied me to see if I meant it. I meant it. I have spent 9 years saying that sentence to other people's children, and every single time, some small part of me is saying it to a girl the same age, standing in a parking lot off Route 30. I drove home, dropped my badge in the bowl by the door, and smelled onions and butter. Daniel was at the stove, sleeves pushed up, grating papers between stirs. He teaches high school history and cooks like a man apologizing to vegetables. He nodded at the counter. Mail's there. Something fancy came for you. The envelope sat on top of the electric bill like it owned the place. Heavy ivory paper. My name in looping calligraphy, the kind people pay for. And in the corner, a postmark I hadn't seen in 6 months, since the last of Nana's estate papers cleared. Barlow Falls, Ohio. I stood at my own counter, in my own kitchen, in the life I built from nothing, and I held that envelope the way you hold something that might go off. Daniel turned down the burner. Paige? Who's it from? I knew before I opened it. Some part of me had been waiting 19 years for it. The invitation itself was beautiful, I'll give them that. Thick cream card, apple blossom border, engraved lettering. Caleb Mercer and Madison Whitmore request the honor of your presence. Saturday, October 17th. First Methodist Church, Barlow Falls, Ohio. Reception to follow at Whitmore Orchard. My brother was getting married, and some string inside me I thought I'd cut pulled tight anyway. Caleb. 35 now. The boy who once threw a hoodie out a truck window was marrying into the biggest family in the county. I turned the card over, and that's when it slid out. A scrap of lined notebook paper, folded in quarters, tucked behind the RSVP card like a stowaway. I unfolded it. My mother's slanted cursive, the same hand that used to sign my permission slips. All is forgiven, Paige. Come home. Mom and Dad. I laughed. One short, ugly laugh, the kind that comes out before you can vote on it. Then my hands started shaking and would not stop. Daniel read it over my shoulder and I watched him do the math on my face. All is forgiven, he said slowly. Forgiven? Paige? What do they think they're forgiving you for? That is the question, isn't it? 19 years of silence, and the message my parents chose to send me was a pardon. Not an apology. Not a question. A pardon, handed down from the people who left a 7th grader at a gas station and drove 80 miles home to sleep in their own beds. I put the note on the counter and smoothed it flat, and I heard my own voice come out level and strange. To explain that, I told him, I have to start at the beginning. So, that's what I'll do for you now. Let me tell you about Barlow Falls. Barlow Falls is the kind of Ohio town where the church bulletin is the newspaper, and the newspaper is the church bulletin. Everybody knows everybody's business, which is exactly why everybody works so hard to make sure there's nothing to know. We lived on Maple Street, in a white house with green shutters and the prettiest porch on the block. My father, Ray Mercer, worked the line at Harding Steel and spent his weekends under other people's trucks, saving for a repair shop of his own someday. He was a deacon at First Methodist. Men shook his hand slow, with respect. My mother, Brenda, ran the church women's circle and could stretch a casserole like a magician. My brother Caleb was 16, and he was the town's whole heart that year. A pitcher with a fastball that made grown men in seed caps talk like poets. And then, there was me. 12 years old, glasses, library card worn soft at the corners. The one who asked questions. Why does Pastor Jim get a new car when the offering plate is for the poor? Why does Mrs. Kepler smile at Mom on Sunday and talk about her at the beauty shop on Tuesday? My mother had one answer for all of it, delivered at the dinner table with a look that could press a shirt. We don't tell family business. That was the first commandment on Maple Street. Not the lying, the telling. You could be broke, you could be furious, you could be crumbling like a dirt road in March, and all of it was fine, as long as the porch stayed painted. Our house was the best-looking house on the street. It was also the quietest. It took me years to understand those two facts were related. The spring I was 12, Harding Steel cut a third of its floor, and my father's name was on the list. I know now that it broke something in him. Back then, all I knew was what I saw. He still got up at 5. He still put on his coveralls, still packed a lunch pail, still backed out of the driveway at the same time every morning. Where he went all day, I couldn't tell you. My mother's mouth got thinner. The phone got answered on the first ring, like she was racing somebody to it. And late one night, I came downstairs for water and stopped on the third step, because my parents were at the kitchen table with a shoebox of envelopes, and my father's voice was a kind of quiet I'd never heard. The truck payment was 2 months behind. The new Silverado, the one he'd bought the month before the layoff, glossy red, parked out front like a trophy. The bank had called twice. My mother said the words consolidate, and Pastor Jim. And my father brought his hand down on the table so hard the sugar bowl jumped. Sunday morning, we sat in the third pew like always. My father put the tithe envelope in the plate with a motion smooth as a card trick, and I watched my mother laugh at something Mrs. Kepler said, bright and easy, like a woman without a shoebox. In the car, I asked her, honestly asking, why it was okay to pretend at church when church was where you learned not to pretend. She looked at me in the mirror for a long second. That's not pretending. That's privacy. 3 weeks later, the truth fell out of my mouth in a bleacher full of strangers, and it cost me my whole childhood. The regional championship was in Fort Wayne, Indiana, 200 miles from our driveway. We made the drive in the red Silverado, my father's hands at 10 and 2, my mother reading the map out loud even though there was one road. Caleb pitched like the town needed him to. 7 innings, and the other team hitting air. I can still see him out there, 16 and certain, the whole world shaped like a strike zone. The Barlow Falls parents filled 2 rows of bleachers, and when the last out smacked leather, they came up roaring. Afterward, in the parking lot, Mrs. Kepler clapped her hands together and announced the team was celebrating at a buffet steakhouse off the interstate. Families welcome. Her treat for the coaches. But everybody else was coming. No excuses. She looked right at my mother. My mother looked at my father. And I, 12 years old, hungry, proud of my brother, raised to answer adults when they spoke, filled that little silence with the plain truth. Dad says we can't afford restaurants until the truck's paid off. That's it. That's the whole crime. The silence that followed had a texture to it, like the air had curdled. Mrs. Kepler's smile went to plastic. Somebody's dad studied his shoes. My mother made a sound like a laugh with the bones taken out, said something about watching our figures, and steered me toward the truck with her nails in my shoulder. My father didn't say anything at all. He shook the coach's hand, congratulated Caleb loud enough for the crowd, and got behind the wheel. We pulled out of that parking lot before they handed out the trophy. The drive home was 200 miles. I only made it 120. Nobody spoke for 2 hours. Caleb sat next to me in the back, still in his uniform, turning his game ball over and over in his hands. My mother watched the fields go by. My father watched the road, and I watched the back of his neck, which was its own kind of weather report. Just past dusk, he signaled and pulled into a marathon station on Route 30, outside Crestline. 80 miles left to home. I know that number now the way other people know their birthdays. He parked at the far pump and told me to get out and stretch my legs. I thought it was a bathroom stop. I was actually relieved, if you can believe that. I stood on the concrete apron under those white fluorescent lights, and I heard the pump click back into its cradle, and the truck rolled forward, and my father's window came down halfway. He looked at me the way he looked at an engine that had disappointed him. "You want to run your mouth like a grown woman?" His voice was calm. That was the worst part, how calm it was. "Then grow up and find your own way home." The window went up. Gravel popped under the tires. I remember thinking, clear as arithmetic, he's turning around at the road. He did not turn around at the road. Behind the rear glass I saw Caleb lunge, saw his palm hit the window once, saw my mother's face float in the side mirror, white as a communion dress. And then the rear window jerked down, and something dark flew out and landed on the shoulder in a heap. The taillights got small. Then they were gone. The thing on the shoulder was Caleb's baseball hoodie, still warm from him. Mercer ironed across the back in county fair letters. I picked it up and put it on. It hung to my knees. I stood under those lights in my brother's name and waited for a truck that was not coming back. Here is what a 12-year-old does at a gas station at night, 80 miles from home, with no phone and 40 cents of nothing in her pockets. First, she waits, because they're coming back. Everyone comes back. Then the sky goes fully dark, and she gets practical, because she is her father's daughter whether he wants her or not. There was a payphone bolted to the wall by the ice cooler. I knew one phone number by heart. Ours. I dialed 0 and asked for a collect call, and my voice only broke on the last digit. The operator's gum snapped while it rang. Twice. 3 times. Then my father's voice, close and impossible. The operator asked if he would accept a collect call from Paige, and my father said, "No, she has to learn." There was a click, and then that flat dead dial tone, and I want you to know I stood there holding the receiver for a long time, as if it might change its mind. I didn't try to flag down a car. 12-year-old girls who get into strangers' cars at night become a different kind of story, and even that night, I knew it. Instead, I walked the building twice like a little inspector and found the spot my body still remembers, the gap behind the dumpster on the east wall, out of the wind, with a clean line of sight to the lit-up pumps. I sat on a flattened cardboard box in my brother's hoodie with my knees inside the fabric, and I counted semis to stay awake. 51 of them. Every set of headlights that slowed, my chest would lift, and then the truck would gas up and leave, and I would start counting again. At 6 in the morning, a woman in a red vest unlocked the front door, came around the side with a trash bag, and dropped it. Her name tag said Loretta. She brought me a carton of chocolate milk and an egg sandwich, and she called the sheriff. By noon, my parents had given that sheriff their version. By Christmas, their version was the only one Barlow Falls had ever heard. My parents' version went like this. We stopped for gas. Paige was sulking over a scolding. She stomped off toward the restrooms, and when we circled back for her, she was nowhere in sight. So we figured she'd hitched a ride to her grandmother's. She was always threatening to. A misunderstanding. A dramatic child. A tired family. A dark highway. The sheriff's deputy who drove me to the substation bought me a candy bar and believed every word of it, because Ray Mercer was a deacon who'd rebuilt the man's transmission for cost. A caseworker from Children's Services opened a file anyway. Her name was Miss Alvarez, and she was the first adult who wrote down what I said with her whole face still. And my grandmother, my mother's mother, Margaret Hutchins, Nana to me, drove down from Westerville the same afternoon, 59 years old, doing 80 in a Buick. A storm in a knitted hat. She took one look at me in that borrowed blanket and something in her face closed like a ledger. The rest happened quietly, the way my family preferred everything. A safety plan first. Then, that winter, legal guardianship through the county probate court. No trial, no headlines, no scene at the church potluck. The caseworker recommended it. Nana petitioned for it. And my parents. This is the part that took me years to say out loud. My parents signed. They sat in a lawyer's office on a Tuesday and signed their 12-year-old over like a truck title, because contesting it meant an investigation, and an investigation meant the town would hear things. Here's what I remember most. My mother cried at that table, but my father exhaled, long and slow, shoulders coming down. I have seen relief on 1,000 faces in the ER. I know it when I see it. He was relieved. Nana's house in Westerville smelled like coffee and lemon oil, and the rules were different there. She laid them out my first night, over grilled cheese, in the voice of a woman who had buried a husband and 2 brothers and did not scare easy. The truth is not a sin in this kitchen. You'll never be sent anywhere for saying it, and nobody leaves this table hungry or unheard. Then she slid me the pickle jar, and that was the whole orientation. I want to be honest. I was not an easy kid to raise after that. I checked the locks twice a night. I kept a duffel bag packed in my closet until I was 15, and Nana never once made me unpack it. She just quietly washed what was in it and folded it back. But that kitchen table held. I graduated second in my class. I put myself through nursing school on scholarship and night shifts at a diner, and when I pinned on my badge at St. Ambrose, Nana sat in the front row and whistled through her fingers like it was a ball game. 19 years, she was my whole family. Her, and eventually Daniel. She died this past February, at 78, in her sleep, with her reading glasses still on top of an open crossword. At the funeral, I stood on one side of the aisle and my parents stood on the other, and we did not speak. 19 years of practice makes perfect. My mother wept in waves timed to the room. My father stood like a fence post in a good suit. Caleb hugged me by the coat rack for an awkward, aching minute, and I still carry the lunchbox note Nana wrote me in 7th grade folded in my wallet. It says, "Chin up, tell the truth, come home after." The night the invitation came, I didn't go to bed. Daniel found me at 2 in the morning at the kitchen table with the note flattened out in front of me, my thumbnail going back and forth over my mother's cursive like I could sand it off the paper. He sat down across from me and waited. He's good at that. Teachers and nurses. We both know the value of the pause. I gave him the shape of it that night, but only the shape. "Gas station," I said. "When I was 12. They drove off, and my grandmother took me in, and I never went back." All true. And all of it sanded smooth, the corners knocked off, the dumpster left out, the phone call left out, the parts that still had splinters in them left out. Even the man who was going to marry me got the porch paint version, and I heard myself doing it, and I could not stop. "I handle things," I told him, when he asked why I'd never told him even that much. "It's what I do. I handle things." He looked at me for a while. Then he said, "You know, of everybody I've ever met, you're the best at being okay." He did not mean it as a compliment. He meant it the way you'd point out a scar. I sat with that until the furnace kicked on, and I still couldn't explain, to him, or to myself, how a woman who can narrate a 9-year ER career in gory detail had never once told the story of one night when she was 12. If you've ever sat at a kitchen table at 2 in the morning, holding a letter you didn't know how to answer, tell me in the comments what you did. And if you're new here, subscribe, because what my family did next, you're going to want to see how it ends. Caleb called 4 days later from a number I didn't recognize, and I answered because I was in scrubs at the hospital and thought it was a pharmacy. There was a pause, and then a voice that had gotten deeper but never really changed. "Hey, Paigey, it's me. My brother." The last time we'd spoken longer than a funeral hallway was when he was 16. He talked fast, the way people do when they've rehearsed. He knew the invitation was a lot. He'd wanted to call for years, and it never felt like his lane, and he was sorry. And then he stopped apologizing for things and got to it. It's my one wedding, Paige. I want my sister there. Whatever else is going on with everybody, I want you in that room. And I was doing okay, honestly, right up until he tried to reassure me. He said he understood why I might not want to come. He said, and I could hear how gently he meant it, I know things were rough back then. Everybody said you were struggling. Mom always told us you refused to come home, that Nana let you make that call, and it broke her heart. I stood in the med room with the phone against my ear and understood something all at once, and it landed like ice water down the spine. My silence had not been neutral. For 19 years I said nothing, and their story had gone right on growing in that empty field. It was in the church directory version of events. It was in my own brother. He wasn't lying to me. He was repeating what he'd been fed his entire adult life. Caleb, I said carefully, did you know they put a note in my invitation? The line went quiet. He hadn't. I read the note to him over the phone. All is forgiven, Paige. Come home. He was silent long enough that I checked the screen to see if the call had dropped. When he finally spoke, he sounded 16 again. That's Mom's handwriting? Hers, I confirmed. Signed for both of them. And then I asked him the question I had never asked another living Mercer. Caleb, what do you remember about the marathon station? I listened to him breathe. I remember Dad saying we'd circle back, he said slowly. He said you needed a scare. 15 minutes, he said. Then we were just driving. And Mom kept saying you were probably hiding at the station to punish them, that somebody would call, that you always landed on your feet. When Nana took you in, they told me it was your choice, that you picked her. Each sentence came out slower than the one before it, like a man walking downstairs in the dark, testing each step before he put his weight on it. You were 12, he said finally, more to himself than to me. I was 16 and I had a driver's license, Paige. I could have. He stopped. I didn't finish the sentence for him. I've learned that from the ER too. People have to diagnose themselves before they'll accept treatment. I told him I'd think about the wedding, and I meant it. And after we hung up, I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage for a long time. I couldn't RSVP yet. There was somewhere I had to stand first. Call it a debt I owed, or a test I needed to take. 65 miles up the highway, there was a gas station waiting for me, and I'd been avoiding that stretch of Route 30 for 19 years. That Saturday, I drove north out of Columbus with the radio off. 65 miles, an hour and 15 minutes, and I felt every one of them in my back teeth. The marathon station is still there, outside Crestline, on the same flat stretch of Route 30. New canopy, new pumps, the same building underneath like a bone under new skin. I parked where the red Silverado had idled 19 years ago and made myself get out. The payphone is gone. There are 4 bolt holes in the brick where it used to hang, and I stood there and put my finger in one, which is not something I can explain, only something I had to do. Then I walked the east wall. The dumpster is newer, but it lives in the exact same corner, out of the wind, with the same clean view of the pumps, and the gap behind it is still the width of a skinny kid. I stood in that gap in my grown woman's coat, 40 feet from where my father said grow up and find your own way home, and I did not fall apart, which frankly surprised me. Inside, I bought a carton of chocolate milk and an egg sandwich, and I ate them standing at the window, looking out at the lot like a security guard reviewing old footage. The woman at the register was in her late 60s, silver braid, red vest, and she rang me up twice before her eyes narrowed and went wide. Egg sandwich girl, she said. Loretta. Still there. Mornings only. 31 years at that register. My throat closed like a fist. And it was standing right there, at that counter, in that building, that I took out my phone and answered the RSVP online. Attending. One guest. Because they left me at that gas station fine. Then that gas station is where I'd decide to come back from, on my own 2 feet. On my own terms. Loretta watched me hit submit. Then she poured 2 coffees without asking, and said the thing that rearranged my whole understanding of that night. I always wondered if anybody ever told you, Loretta said, about the truck. I set my coffee down. What truck? Night you were out there. I came in at 6 and found you, but Dwight worked the overnight, and he told the sheriff same as he told me. Around 1 in the morning, a pickup come through slow. Didn't gas up, didn't park. Just rolled the length of the lot, past the pumps, real slow, and then got back on the highway headed east. She wiped the counter in a slow circle, watching me. Dwight only remembered it because of how slow it went, like they was looking for something. I heard my own voice ask if Dwight had said anything else. One thing. Loretta's jaw set. Woman in the passenger seat, looking hard out the window. He raised a hand at him, like you do. Nobody waved back. I stood very still at that counter, doing arithmetic I did not want to do. Red pickup, she confirmed. East is toward Barlow Falls. 1 in the morning, 7 hours after the gravel popped, 5 hours after the collect call. For 19 years, the story I survived on was that they never came back. That they hit the garage door and never thought twice. It turns out that was the merciful version. Somebody drove that truck back 80 miles in the middle of the night. Somebody rolled through that lot at walking speed while I slept 20 feet away behind a dumpster, below the light line, exactly as invisible as I'd made myself. And then, this is the part I couldn't get past, they pulled back onto the highway and went home without so much as opening a door. Who was driving? Why didn't they stop? I carried those questions all the way to a wedding. I got home from Cresline after dark, and Daniel took one look at me and turned off the game. And this time, I told it whole. The bleachers in Fort Wayne, the half-open window, the hoodie in a heap on the shoulder, the payphone, the gum-snapping operator, my father's voice saying she has to learn, the click, the dial tone, the gap behind the dumpster and the 51 semis and the cardboard that held my body heat better than my family ever had. And then the new piece, still sharp from the box, a truck at 1 a.m., rolling slow, a woman's face at the passenger glass, and taillights going east. Daniel listened the way I'd want to be listened to, which is to say, he didn't flinch, and he didn't perform. When I finished, he got up, poured 2 glasses of water, set one in front of me like a nurse, and asked exactly one question. What do you want from that room, Paige? Not are you okay? Not do you want me to hate them for you? Which is the question most people are really answering when they say I'm so sorry. What did I want? I opened my laptop instead of answering, because that's who I am, and I typed a toast. 2 paragraphs. Kind, beige, bulletproof. Congratulations to Caleb and Madison. Family is complicated. Love wins. Raise your glasses. I named the file Wedding Words and read it out loud, and it tasted like the airplane version of a meal. Daniel read it over my shoulder. It's nice, he said in the tone he uses for essays that are technically complete. I saved it anyway. Right up until the last second, I want you to know, I fully intended to read that version. My mother called on a Thursday. Caleb had given her my number. He told me later he'd agonized over it. And I answered standing at my kitchen window and heard her voice live for the first time in 19 years. It was smaller than I remembered, and sweeter, like syrup near the bottom of the jar. She said my whole name. She said the wedding would be beautiful, that the Whitmores had done so much with the orchard, and had I been getting her Christmas cards all these years, she'd never been sure the address was right. And then, with the smallest little laugh, she got to the point. I hope we can keep things pleasant, sweetheart. You were always so dramatic about the past. Let's not relitigate ancient history at your brother's wedding. I watched a cardinal land on my fire escape and asked, evenly, what she thought I might relitigate. The pause had lace on it. Nothing, honey, it's just, the Whitmores are lovely people. Madison's father has been so good to Caleb and the shop. They asked about you, our daughter the nurse. They're so pleased the whole family will be together. And there it was, laid out plain as a place setting. The Whitmores had asked about the missing sister. A gap in the family photo raises questions, and questions are the one thing that Porch was built to prevent. I wasn't being welcomed home. I was being cast. A supporting role in a production called The Mercers Are Whole, one night only, formal attire. "See you in October, Mom," I said. She exhaled, satisfied, and before she hung up she said it. The old commandment, warm as a quilt and twice as smothering. "We don't tell family business, honey." I almost canceled twice. The Sunday before the wedding, I drove to Westerville instead, to the cemetery where Nana is buried under a headstone that says Hutchins, and, at her written instruction, nothing else. The dates are nobody's business. I sat on the grass and told her all of it. The invitation, the note, the truck at 1 a.m., because some conversations don't stop just because one party has died. Then I let myself into her house, which is half-packed boxes now, and opened the cedar chest in the back bedroom, looking for her good tablecloth. It was there, but it was lying on top of something else. A gallon storage bag, sealed, labeled in Nana's block capitals, page 12 wires old, keep. Inside was Caleb's baseball hoodie. She'd washed it. I remember it going into her machine that first week. And then, apparently, she had kept it for 19 years, folded like a flag. Mercer across the back in cracked iron-on letters. It still fit over my coat, is the thing. I sat on the floor of my dead grandmother's bedroom in my brother's hoodie and understood why she'd kept it. It was the only thing that came out of that truck for me. One person in that family, 16 years old and outvoted, had thrown me his own warmth on the way out. Evidence, Nana would have called it. She kept evidence that one of them had loved me, even clumsy, even out a window. I drove home with it on the passenger seat like a co-pilot. If somebody in your family ever rewrote a story you paid for, type the word mine in the comments. I read everyone. And stay with me, because the next stop is Barlow Falls, and the rehearsal dinner is where their perfect picture started to crack. Barlow Falls, 19 years later, is a town wearing the same outfit, new gas station on the north end, same banner over Main Street congratulating the baseball team, same marquee outside First Methodist, which that week read, "Love bears all things." I drove in on the Friday of the rehearsal dinner, 2 hours up from Columbus with Daniel's hand over mine on the gear shift, and I made myself roll down Maple Street exactly once, at a respectful 25 miles an hour. White house, green shutters, the porch, freshly painted. I did not slow down. We checked into the Pinehurst Motel, and at 6 o'clock I walked into the Grange Hall, where the Mercer and Whitmore families were merging over pulled pork and sheet cake. My mother saw me first. I watched it happen. The freeze, the recalculation, and then the performance rising in her like water in a glass. "Paige!" Arms wide, voice pitched to Carrie. "Our Paige, the nurse!" She crossed the whole hall to hug me, and I stood in that hug like a coat rack, counting the faces watching us over her shoulder, which was, of course, the point of the hug. 19 years, and my first embrace from my mother came with an audience and stage lighting. My father followed at a deacon's pace. Up close he was smaller, grayer, still pressed and combed like a man expecting inspection. He did not hug me. He put out his hand and I shook it, and it was exactly like closing on a used car. "Good you came," he said. That was the whole speech. My mother's eyes were already wet, and I noticed, you learn to chart these things, that the tears had arrived precisely as the Whitmores drifted into viewing range. Dinner was long tables, checked cloths, and my family's mythology performed live for an audience of Whitmores. I sat across from Madison, who turned out to be easy to like. Quick-eyed, warm, the kind of bride who learns the names of everyone refilling the tea. Her parents held court at the head of the table, orchard money and manners, and my father addressed them the way he used to address the bank. Somewhere between the pork and the cake, Mr. Whitmore asked, kindly, how it felt to have the whole family back together. My father folded his hands. "Kids scatter," he said in his pulpit voice. "Roots hold. Mercers always find their way back." There were warm murmurs. My mother picked it up like a duet they'd rehearsed. "Paige went through a phase back then. Teenagers. You know how it is." A tinkling little laugh. "She went and stayed with my mother a while, up in Westerville. But family is family, and here we all are. I want you to understand what it costs to sit still while your own erasure is served to a room as an appetizer. a phase. A while. My entire life after 12, folded down to the size of a napkin and tucked under a plate. Mrs. Whitmore leaned over and squeezed my hand. "We're just so glad this family healed," she said. And she meant it. And that was somehow the worst part. I smiled and said the orchard sounded beautiful, because Caleb was watching me down the table with his jaw tight, and it was his weekend, and I had promised myself I would not be the storm. Then dessert came, and beside my coffee cup sat tomorrow's place card, calligraphy again. Head table, seated between Ray and Brenda Mercer. I found my mother alone in the Grange Hall kitchen at the end of the night, boxing leftover cake with the efficiency of a woman who has boxed 1,000 cakes. I hadn't planned it. My feet just took me in there, and I heard myself close the door, and I asked the only question I had left. "Did you come back that night?" Her hands stopped. She didn't ask what night. 19 years of we don't discuss it. And she didn't ask me which night I meant, and that told me plenty all by itself. She set down the cake server, and I watched her try on the usual outfits. The laugh, the honestly page, the ancient history. And none of them fit in a closed kitchen with no audience, and finally her shoulders came down an inch, and my mother looked her age for the first time all evening. "I made him turn the truck around," she said quietly. "Middle of the night. I couldn't sleep. I told him we were going back. And he drove. And we came through that lot around 1 and you weren't under the lights." I looked Paige. I looked hard. Her chin trembled and steadied. "And your father said," he said, "if she sees us rescue her, the lesson dies. He said you'd found somewhere warm, that the clerk had surely called someone by now, that girls like you always land on their feet. And we—" She pressed the box lid down until it clicked. "We went home." I stood 20 feet from her, the same distance as a dumpster from a row of pumps, and let the silence hold its own. Then she looked up with wet eyes and said the thing she must have believed was a gift. "I wrote the note, sweetheart. The one in the invitation. Your father he doesn't apologize. He never has. Not once in 57 years. Not to anyone. All is forgiven. Honey, that is the closest thing you will ever get." So there it was. I had come for an acknowledgement. There was none in stock, and there never would be. My father was in the parking lot smoking by his truck. A newer Silverado, still red. Some flags don't change. And because the night was apparently determined to empty every drawer, he spoke to me. "Your mother in there crying?" I said she was fine. He nodded at the tailgate, which is Mercer for sit, and I didn't, and he smoked a while. "You know what my dad did," he said. Not a question. "Summer I was 10? I did not. He'd never told me one story about himself. Not in 12 years under his roof. County fair. I mouthed off at him in front of the feed dealer. Smart little comment. Thought I was funny. He put me by the stock pens, told me to think about who paid for my boots. And he walked off. Fair closed at 10. He came back at dark. My father tapped ash and watched it fall. I stood by those pens all day, watched every man in that county walk past me, and I never once mouthed off in front of another man again. Not once, in 47 years. He said it the way you'd display a trophy. And here is the part I need you to sit with. His hands were shaking. Slightly, at the edges, the way they do in my ER when the body remembers what the mouth won't. 10 years old, standing at the stock pens from noon to dark, watching the crowd for one particular hat. He'd been that boy, and nobody had ever come for that boy either, and he had spent his whole life polishing it into a parable. "You turned out strong," my father said, dropping the butt and grinding it out. "Strongest of anybody in that hall. That's mine, Paige. That came from me. You're welcome." He walked inside, and I stood in the gravel and let go, finally and completely, of the apology I had been quietly awaiting for 19 years. It was never coming. It had never even existed. The question that finally knocked me sideways came from my brother, the night before his wedding. Caleb knocked on my motel door at 10 that night, still in his rehearsal clothes, carrying 2 bottles of root beer like we were kids sneaking provisions. He came in, and then he stopped, because the hoodie was laid over the chair. "Mercer," Cracked letters, size youth large on a hanger built for men. He touched the sleeve like it might not be real. You kept that? Nana kept it, I told him. 19 years, in a cedar chest, labeled in block capitals. He sat down on the edge of the bed with a bottle in each hand and didn't open either one. And I made a decision I had been circling for weeks. If he was going to stand at an altar tomorrow and start a family of his own, he would do it knowing the whole thing. So I told my brother what I had told Daniel. All of it, in order, in the flat voice I use for handoff reports. Because that voice is the only container strong enough. The window at half-mast. The collect call. Our father's voice saying she has to learn. The gap behind the dumpster and the count of semis. The truck at 1 a.m., and whose face was at the passenger glass. Caleb sat there getting paler by the paragraph, and when I got to the payphone he made a sound like he'd been hit. I heard it, he said. The phone. That night. It rang once, late, and I came out on the stairs, and Dad was standing in the kitchen in the dark holding it. I heard him say no. Just, no. And Mom asked who it was, and he said, wrong number. Go to bed. My brother put his face in his hands, 35 years old, shoulders heaving, and said the truest thing anyone in my family has ever said to me. I told myself you were okay because Nana came. I needed you to be okay so I didn't have to know what I knew. Then he wiped his face, looked up, and asked it. Tomorrow, will you stand up and say a few words? As my family? The wedding itself was genuinely beautiful, and I need you to know that, because nothing that happened later was aimed at the couple. October light through the church's old glass, Madison in her grandmother's lace, Caleb crying at the altar before she was halfway down the aisle, which made the whole left side of the church laugh softly because the town's fastball had folded like a lawn chair. I sat in the second pew with Daniel's hand in mine and my clutch on my knee. And inside the clutch was the safe toast, printed and folded, 2 kind beige paragraphs standing by. During photos on the church steps, my mother took my hand, took it, arranged it in hers. At the exact moment the photographer raised his camera. I let her. You can chart a whole life in what people do when lenses come up. The reception was at Whitmore Orchard in a barn strung with lights, apple crates stacked into a bar, 200 guests under the rafters. The Whitmore's people, the church, half of Barlow Falls. My place card sat where promised, head table, between my parents, and I took my seat like a good cast member while my mother narrated to the nearest Whitmore aunt how blessed she was, all her babies under one roof. I looked out at that glowing room and understood, with a calm that surprised me, exactly what I was there to be. The proof. The living, smiling proof that whatever anyone might have half heard over the years, it couldn't have been so bad. Look at her, sitting right there between them. Dinner ended. Glasses were filled. The DJ said the family would like to say a few words, and my father pushed back his chair, stood, and tapped his glass with a spoon. My father does not give speeches. He gives verdicts, slowly, and a barn full of people leaned in to receive one. He thanked the Whitmores for the orchard, for their generosity, for raising a young woman worthy of the Mercer name. He said it exactly that way around, and nobody but me seemed to notice. He praised Caleb, the arm, the shop, the son a man builds his name on. And then my father turned, unhurried, and looked down the head table at me, and I knew what was coming the way you know a storm by the color of the sky. Every family, he said, weathers storms. Every crop takes a bad year. Slow nods out in the dark. Our daughter Paige. And 200 faces swung toward me on cue. Drifted from us for a while. Went her own way. We won't dwell on old weather tonight. A pause. Measured like bored feet. Because tonight, with my son married into this fine family, I can stand here and say it plain. My family is whole again. All is forgiven. He lifted his glass to the room he had just finished rearranging. To family. And the barn. 200 glasses. The church crowd. The orchard money. Rose and echoed it back to him. To family. My mother dabbed her eyes with a napkin on tempo. The DJ started gentle applause. I sat between my parents with my hands in my lap, watching my father accept the room's admiration for forgiving me, publicly, warmly, in front of the very people whose questions had gotten me invited. For the crime of having been left at a gas station when I was 12. And one seat down from Madison, my brother Caleb was not clapping. The next part was not in anyone's program. Caleb stood up, buttoned his jacket, and held out his hand to the DJ for the microphone. The groom. So the room hushed itself, expecting thank yous. He looked at our father for a second, and then past him, at me. Actually, Caleb said, before we eat cake, my sister came a long way to be here tonight. His voice caught and steadied. A lot further than most of you know. Paige? He walked the length of the head table and held the microphone out to me. Would you say a few words? As my family? There are moments a room can feel without understanding. The temperature drops. The meaning arrives ahead of the facts. My mother's hand closed on my wrist under the tablecloth. Gently. A warning dressed as affection. My father's jaw set into the same weather I'd watched from a backseat 19 years ago. 200 strangers smiled at me, expecting sweetness. And I sat there with the choice. The real one. The one I'd been carrying since August, finally out of the envelope and sitting in my lap. In my clutch, the safe toast. 2 beige paragraphs. And behind them, everything I came from. The seat at the holiday table, my mother's Christmas cards, a family, on the one condition that the stories stay theirs. And in my chest, 19 years. I looked at my brother holding out that microphone like a hand off a truck window. I slid my wrist out from under my mother's fingers, and I stood up. I took the microphone, and then I did the thing I still think about. I took the safe toast out of my clutch, and I folded it in half, and I set it down on the tablecloth in front of my father, where he could watch me not read it. My name is Paige Mercer, I said, and my voice came out the way it comes out in a code. Level, unhurried, because somebody in the room has to be. Most of you have never met me. I'm told I went through a phase. Soft laughter, uncertain. I let it die on its own. 19 years ago, my brother pitched the best game of his life in Fort Wayne, Indiana. On the drive home at a marathon station on Route 30 outside Crestline, my father told me to get out of the truck. I was 12. I had embarrassed the family that afternoon. I'd told another mother, out loud, that we couldn't afford the team dinner. And so my father looked at me under those gas station lights and said, "You want to run your mouth like a grown woman? Grow up and find your own way home." And my family drove away. No laughter now, no forks. The barn had gone so quiet I could hear the string lights hum. I called home collect from the payphone that night. The call was refused. I slept on a flattened box behind the dumpster, in my brother's baseball hoodie. He threw it out the window as they pulled away. It was the only warmth my family offered me that night, and I want him to know I still have it. In the morning, a stranger named Loretta found me. She bought me chocolate milk and an egg sandwich and called the sheriff, and my grandmother Margaret drove down that same day and gave me a home and a kitchen where the truth was never a sin. My parents signed the guardianship papers that winter. They have just now forgiven me. I turned then and looked at my father, who had gone the color of unpainted fence. Dad, I did what you told me. I grew up. I found my own way home. It's a 2-bedroom in Columbus, with a man who has never once left me anywhere. My mother was crying. And for the first time in my life, I believed the tears and understood they changed nothing. You forgave me tonight, in front of witnesses. So let me return the kindness. I forgive myself for spending 19 years believing I had to earn my way back into a family that drove away. I raised my glass, and I found the 2 faces at the center of the room. Caleb, Madison. May your children grow up knowing the truth is not a sin in their kitchen, and may they never, ever have to be brave at a gas station. To the bride and groom. And I drank, and nobody in that barn was breathing. My father stood up so fast his chair went over backward, and the crack of it hitting the floor was the loudest sound of the night. That is enough. 57 years old, deacon of First Methodist, a man who had never once raised his voice in public. And the whole county was now watching him do it at his son's wedding. We don't tell. And there he stopped. Right there, in the middle of the commandment, because some part of him heard it. Heard what the end of that sentence was going to confess in front of 200 people. The room finished it for him in perfect silence. We don't tell family business. You could watch the sentence land on every face under the string lights, watch the whole barn understand that he wasn't denying anything I'd said. He was objecting to the telling. My mother had her napkin pressed to her mouth. Mr. Whitmore set his glass down on the table, slowly and deliberately, and did not pick it back up. And in Orchard Country that is a verdict with a gavel. And then, Madison Whitmore Mercer, 1 hour into the name, stood up in her grandmother's lace, crossed the floor in front of everyone and put her arms around me. "Thank you," she said into my ear, "just for me. Now I know what I married into, and what I'm going to do differently." Caleb was next, wrapping us both, his tears dripping on my shoulder in full view of the town that had watched him grow up golden. I set the microphone down on the head table, next to the folded toast I never read. I kissed my new sister-in-law on the cheek, and I walked out of that barn into the cold October air, spine straight, steps even, exactly the way you walk out of a room you are finally done auditioning for. She caught up with me in the gravel lot between the parked trucks, her heels punching little holes in the ground, and her voice when it came was stripped of every ounce of syrup. "You've killed this family." My mother stood under the orchard string lights with her fists at her sides, 55 years of managed appearances coming apart at the seams. "Do you understand me, Paige? 36 years I have held this family together, and you walked in and killed it in 5 minutes." I opened the car door and I felt for the anger, and here is the strange mercy of that night. It wasn't there. There was just clarity, cool and complete, like the moment a fever breaks. "No, Mom," I said. "This family died at a gas station 19 years ago. I'm just the one who finally reported it." She stood there. Behind her, through the barn doors, I could see the wedding recovering itself the way rooms do. The DJ murmuring, the caterers moving, Caleb's hand on Madison's back. In front of me, my mother's face did something I had never seen it do. It ran out of versions. No performance came. Nothing came. Daniel got in beside me and we pulled out of the lot, past the rows of trucks, down the orchard lane with the apple crates ghostly in the headlights, and onto the state route, heading south. Somewhere past Mansfield, I watched the trip odometer roll over 80 miles, and I said it out loud to the dark windshield, because 80 miles was once the exact distance between me and everyone who was supposed to love me. Daniel looked over. "You okay?" I checked, honestly, the way you'd check a pulse. "Yes," I said. And for the first time in 19 years, it wasn't a performance. We didn't stop. I won't pretend the weeks after were tidy. Barlow Falls split like firewood. My Aunt Carol left a voicemail informing me that I had ruined a wedding, humiliated 2 good people, and that Nana, of all people, would be ashamed of me, which told me only that she had never once eaten at Nana's table. 2 cousins I barely remembered texted the other thing. "I believe you." One added quietly that everyone had always wondered why a 12-year-old would suddenly go live in Westerville. My parents never called. There was no apology after all, no reckoning, no movie ending. What came instead, through the family grapevine, was version 3.0. Paige has been troubled since she was a little girl. She got overwrought at the reception. We're praying for her. The porch, repainting itself in real time. The old me would have argued with it or ached over it. Instead, I noticed something one ordinary Tuesday in November. I was standing at my mailbox, and my stomach was quiet. 19 years of bracing every time an envelope looked too formal, and the dread had simply packed up and left, because the thing I'd been bracing against had finally happened, out loud, in front of everyone, and I was still here. Madison sent a thank you card from the honeymoon. "Caleb told me the rest," she wrote. You gave us a true beginning. Most people only get the pretty kind. Caleb calls every Sunday now, 7 o'clock, regular as a pill schedule. Some calls are easy, some are him grieving the parents he thought he had, and I let him, because nobody let me. And one gray afternoon, a padded envelope arrived from Crestline, Ohio. Inside was a postcard of a marathon station at sunset, the kind of card nobody has ever wanted, and on the back, no message at all. Just a signature. Loretta. It's framed in my kitchen now, next to the window, where the light hits it at 6 in the morning. Thanksgiving was at my place. 4 chairs, 1 slightly burned turkey, 0 performances. Daniel carved. Madison brought her grandmother's rolls and told stories on Caleb until he begged for mercy. At one point, my brother opened my refrigerator looking for the cranberry sauce and went still, and then started laughing in that helpless, hiccuping way because on the top shelf, front and center, sat a carton of chocolate milk. He turned around with it in his hand like evidence. Every week, I told him. Grocery store. Can't explain it. Don't need to. He put it back gently, the way you handle a relic. The hoodie lives folded on my bookshelf now, between the nursing textbooks and Nana's crossword dictionaries, cracked letters facing out. Mercer. My name too, after all. I paid enough for it. Near the end of the night, Caleb raised his glass of cider and cleared his throat twice before it came out. When we have kids, he said, looking at me, they're going to know their aunt first, before any other version of anything, and they're going to get the whole story, in their own kitchen. Madison covered his hand. Under the table, mine was steady. Because here is what 19 years